Hello and welcome to this government history, politics discussion, another episode, another part. This could be a subsection of a section. Anti-war, the topic is anti-war through the years, okay? Anti-war through the years. So the whole purpose, and people have told me, they say, well, I like your history, government history, politics discussion. So the whole idea for this one is to look at the wars the United States have been involved in over the years, from 1775 to today, and look at it from an anti-war viewpoint. So we have the, right, with me, that's part of the sort of online manuscript or book I wrote, right-wing political solutions, the paleo-conservative viewpoint. Oh, and by the way, I have this Modelo Negra dark beer, dark Bock, I guess, and Dunkelbock. My friend David did a review of it, and I'll post that later. He said he wants to do regular beers pretty often. Obviously, he does like super expensive craft beers, but also just regular things because he drinks a lot of regular old beers. Anyway, back to this. Beer Belly Traveler says, "Good afternoon. Happy to finally catch you live." Well, thank you. Nice. I was going to ask you what you were drinking, man. So Negra Modelo, not really a black beer, more like amber. All right. So we better not delay. We better not tarry. I invited people to join. You can join as long as you have deportment, right? You have good audio visual hookups. You're not echoing or having those problems, and that you're not going to use bad language or act crazy. But if you want to discuss it, fine. But some people will say, "I'm putting a thumbs down. I don't like it. I don't like what you're saying." Well, of course you don't have to like what I'm saying, but instead of doing that, taking the easy way out, why don't you join the discussion or join the actual chat and give your viewpoint, okay? So you're streaming via Google Hangouts, correct? That's correct. / YouTube, it kind of works together. All right, don't just say, poo-poo on your ideas, poo-poo, but sort of like Ace Rothstein told Lester Diamond, or Ace Rothstein told Lester Diamond, "Be a man, don't be a pimp." So you know what I mean. Say what you got to say. All right. So anyway, so you're welcome to say it. All right. So let's go. Okay, 1775. What do we have? Now the beer looks nice. What do we have there? Well, whatever you want to call it, the War for American Independence, the Revolutionary War, which expanded into Europe and became the War of the American Revolution, the people in Europe fighting each other and over in India and the Caribbean. We won't get into all of that because we're looking at it from the U.S. perspective, and U.S. had no involvement in those other areas of the war. So from the anti-war viewpoint, what would our position be as far as the American Revolution, which we celebrate every year on July 4th? If you ask most Americans, what is July 4th about? They could probably explain it better by saying it has something to do with drinking beer and eating chips and hot dogs and barbecue and not going to work. That was kind of the level of it. And when we broke away from, or we got our freedom, to be a very simplistic answer. So what about that? Okay, Great Britain rules the United States, or the colonies, 1775. Now, if you read these history books, they make it sound like the British ruled America with an iron hand, an iron fist, when in reality, it was sort of like a very detached rule. The colonies were, to a large extent, self-governing, and they did whatever they wanted. And even when they had rules, they still did whatever they wanted, right? The British are over there across the ocean, the Americans are here. So the Americans, part of the British Empire, they mostly were fine with it. They didn't care, you know. They wanted protection from the Indians, or maybe help grab an Indian land in many cases, and from France. They want protection from France. Hello, Gabe. So, okay, we want the protection, but we don't want to pay for it. You know what I mean? We want the protection of the British Navy, and we want the protection of the British Army, the small British Army, but we don't want to pay for it. So they had the big French and Indian War, ended 1763, and the British say, well, it costs so much to practically bankrupt the country. So there's these laws on the books, these importation laws, you know, these trade laws, which are never enforced. So the British decided they're going to start enforcing these trade laws. They didn't want to follow that. But really, you had a faction of the American government, colonial governments, not a big faction, but a faction. They, in their mind, they want to break away from Great Britain, and they want to be in total control. That's the real point, is what we're looking at from the anti-war viewpoint. Okay, you love this topic, says Beer Belly Travelers. And JTLBZ says hi. Okay, well, watch the topic or join it. We're going to go through it. So, I mean, you know how these things go. You want a war, so you trump it up. You make it sound like, hold on a second. We'll take care of a little problem. So you make it sound terrible. The British are so bad, but they're really not doing anything. And so you stage a bunch of incidents, and then you spark a conflict. Now, there's a mythology. The British will not let people have arms. You have no right to bear arms. Well, that was not true. Practically every American had handguns, rifles, or hunting rifles and things like that. And there was really no regulations on that. The whole point of the Lexington and Concord battles was that it wasn't a matter of a right to bear arms. They were stockpiling weapons for an attack. You know what I mean? The Patriots, so-called. There was a huge arms cache, and they were stockpiling weapons for an obvious revolt. And the British knew this, so they wanted to get a hold of the weapons and crack down on the revolt. It wasn't, we have this idea all of a sudden that no Americans can own weapons. There was no concept of that. And plus you have 13 colonies, and they're basically self-governing. And they were very liberal with gun laws. Some more strict than others, because you have different colonies, different way of life, they're like 13 different little countries, right? 13 little British countries in America, not to mention other British countries in Canada, you know, Ontario, Quebec, which was a French country that was captured by the British, Jamaica, the Bahama Islands, Turks and Caicos Islands, goes on and on with their own way of life, their own internal self-government to a large and varying degree, depending on the colony. So they got what they wanted. They had these attacks. They desired it. They got it. They plotted, and they got the attack of the war. And so, hey, we can fight the British, which was the plan all along, and we can then we can get France to help us. Now, France was up until that time an age-old enemy of the American colonies. They hated the French, but now they got a common interest. The colonies' interest is to break away from Great Britain, although most colonists either didn't want to break away, they were loyal. That's about a third of them. Another third were indifferent. They didn't necessarily want to be British or not be British, but they certainly weren't going to fight about it. They just didn't care. They just want to be left alone and just do their thing, right? So, you know, like a lot of Americans today, apolitical, they just not involved in politics. Okay. So they start conspiring with the enemy, basically France. What does France want to get involved for? Well, they want to get revenge against Great Britain. And so they help the Americans with arms, sales, and eventually, after about 2 years, direct intervention, about 3 years, direct intervention, joining the war effort. And so now when they can see that the British are down and getting kicked, then there's the typical piling on, right? The Spanish jump in, the Dutch jump in, and then a big war breaks out in Europe. The Prussians tend to help the British and all this. So, you know, so kind of a big mess, right? So, so Great Britain lost. Now, on their own, without any foreign intervention, they might have smashed the American rebels. But with France jumping in and Spain and the Dutch states, well, it became like a hopeless situation. So after 8 years of fighting, really after 6 years, because they just negotiated for 2 years, they just said, okay, forget it. You can have your independence. We're out. They did really bust up the allies, though, the American allies in the Caribbean and India and Europe. So the British did well on other parts of the world. So they did lose the colonies, but the treaty wasn't too unfavorable for them over in India and the Caribbean. But that was a consolation, because they did not want to lose the American colonies, and they were very angry about it, because they felt like, you know, things were going well, and these troublemakers just like started the problem, you know, started trouble, and were able to break the colonies away from Great Britain, and used a lot of fallacious propaganda to do it. Like the British were this terrible country, you know, they're doing all these terrible things to the Americans, when in fact they really weren't doing anything. Well, sometimes you could do that. You can instigate a war. But okay, so what would the anti-war position have been when that started? Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious. The anti-war would have said, and there wasn't really that conception back then, but you would have said, well, why are we doing this? I mean, this is not a reason to fight. You don't just rebel against the government because you don't like them, but you might want to be in control. So obviously, you would have taken the British side and tried to fight against these people, you know. The rebels, you would have fought against the rebels. Now, let's move along. We won't go into the Indian Wars too much, because it's a little more complicated. And I don't mean from an anti-war perspective. I mean, there's so many of these wars, and the scale of each of them was so small in the context of warfare, right? They were more like brush fire wars. Important for the Indians, because they lost all their land, of course. Beer Belly Traveler says, Ron, you need a moderator. Yeah, you're right. I do have one, but he doesn't moderate too much. And there's a case-by-case basis with those things. They tend to differ. Each situation is a little different, but naturally, you don't want people losing their land. But we won't get into that. I guess you could say the Indians should have had a more, should have had a little better immigration policy, don't you think? They had a weak immigration policy, and look what happened to them. I mean, that's a flip statement to make, but when you look at it in a way, it's sort of reflective of the whole immigration concept. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Beer Belly. Yankees Outdoor Adventures say, hey, buddy. Or Beer Buddies, or whatever that is. But anyway, let's go on. So let's move along. We don't want to get bogged down. So we go to the war, the next major war, the War of 1812. which is called that because it started in 1812. So why did that war come about? Well, you've got the British and the French fighting, because they always were fighting, usually over land, a turf war, a real estate war, real estate dispute, because they both, I mean, whoever heard of sharing, right? When you could just fight and bankrupt your country like the French did. Of course, the War of 1812, that was a little different war, because you had the War of the French Revolution, which started around 1793, and it just went on and on and on until 1815. Okay, so we're talking about a war that lasted like 25 years, off and on, usually on. Okay, so it really was not related to the U.S. at all. It had nothing to do with the United States, essentially. And the U.S. wasn't involved in the French Revolution. You had some Americans taking sides, but generally they just were watching it, didn't have much involvement. The Americans were involved in that war, however, because there was a lot of money to be made. The New England states were doing a heavy trade with the British and the French, because they could jack up the prices, because the British and the French both need war supplies. So you can command a huge price. And a lot of ships would be captured by the British going to France and French colonies. And a lot of French ships, you know, British ships would be captured by the French going to British territories. Although the British had a much better capture rate, because their Navy was much better than the French Navy. So as time went on, the British were able to begin to dominate that war through their superior naval power. So then you tended to have more American ships being captured by the British, okay, because of their ability to do so. The New England states didn't seem to really mind, though, because they made so much money, even if they lost, let's say, 25% of the ships. The price they could get, the money that was coming in from the trade was worth losing the ships. It was worth the risk. So they didn't really mind too much. Who was pushing for the War of 1812? You would think it would be the coastal states, right? The states being abused by the British commerce disruptors, or people trying to enforce the blockade, I should say. No, actually, the people pushing for the war were the southern states, Louisiana, Mississippi. Louisiana, a brand new state, but Kentucky, mainly Kentucky, Tennessee, and some of the deep South states, and the western states, Ohio, Illinois. Well, Ohio, Illinois, and then what weren't states yet. But these mainly areas in the south of the Ohio River and west of the Appalachian Mountains, who were not directly affected by the blockade. Why did they want this? Well, they said, propaganda, oh, we have to fight the British because they keep violating our neutrality, and they're violating our right to free trade on the seas. Okay, they should not be attacking our ships, etc. Okay, all right. Now, so the people that weren't being affected by the attacks generally were pushing for the war. Now, this was not a universally enthusiastic war. When the President Madison finally asked Congress to declare war on Great Britain in 1812, it was not that big of a, it wasn't a lopsided vote. You had a lot of people in the House and the Senate voting against the war, mainly from the New England states. And in fact, after the war broke out, there was a meeting of the New England states with an attempt to perhaps secede from the United States and make a separate country and make peace with Great Britain, if not rejoin Great Britain. Interesting, ironic, isn't it not, considering what happened 45 years later? Okay. What's the first thing the United States Army did when they declared war on Great Britain? Or the U.S. military, the Navy? Did they go out there and fight the British on the seas to protect commerce? No, they invaded Canada. And interestingly, that's the first thing the U.S. did in 1775. When they declared, when they started to revolt against the British in 1775 to get independence, their first move was to invade Canada. which might make you realize that perhaps it wasn't about breaking away so much and getting independence and having the right to bear arms. Maybe it was about grabbing other people's land. So what did the United States do when they declared war on Great Britain? To protect themselves from attacks on the sea, they invaded Canada in 1812 and again in 1813. Burned down a city, York, today Toronto. It was a town then, Toronto. The British got revenge because when they made a counter invasion in 1814, they invaded Washington, D.C., captured the White House and set it on fire. So that was a humiliating defeat for the British to invade Washington, D.C. and actually capture the White House and almost the president, who escaped minutes before they got there, really. And then the war did not go very well for the Americans. They did win the Battle of New Orleans, but they called the war off in 1814 with a ceasefire and eventually a treaty ending the war, an official treaty in 1815. Okay, so the Battle of New Orleans, they often say, well, it was fought after the treaty was signed. That is true, but it wasn't ratified yet. See, the treaty had not been ratified by the British Parliament, so had they captured New Orleans, they might have put that ratification on hold and said, well, now we may go ahead and keep New Orleans, you see. But so that was a useless war from the anti-war viewpoint. So our position would have obviously been, we would oppose it. It's ridiculous. We should not be attacking Great Britain. If they want to trade and go out into a war zone, right? If these guys want to go into a war zone, then that's the risk they take. Of course, the British are very aggressive, you know, so they have a tendency to get in your business, you see, and just come looking for your ships. But you could solve that really like they did in 1939 with the cash and carry policy. Cash and carry, meaning if you want to buy war materials from the United States, you pay with cash, not credit, because then that will draw you into the war, because then you don't want the people who owe you all the money to lose because you're not going to get paid. Cash only, and you carry it back on your ships. Perfect idea. But we'll get to that war later. But that wasn't done in 1812. So the next big major war is what? The Mexican War, or really more accurately, the War on Mexico. Now that was a beef, you see, because Mexico is this big, huge country that used to go all the way up to Colorado and California, Texas, New Mexico, and had been a Spanish territory until they revolted. That's another story, doesn't involve us. And Mexico is a very corrupt government with dictators and all of this stuff, but they weren't expansionists. They weren't going to attack somebody else's land and try to take their stuff. So you didn't have to worry about Mexico attacking you. They could barely run their own country. How are they going to attack you? So there's no threat to anybody, not then and not to date. Okay, so there was never an argument, we better watch out because Mexico might attack us. No one, even the warmongers wouldn't have said that. People would have laughed at them, you know. Well, we know what this goes back to, the Texas situation. Texas, there's a territory, the Mexican territory of Texas borders Louisiana. All right. So the Mexicans say, well, we need settlers. That's an empty territory. It's mostly Comanche Indians, which are hostile to Mexico. And we would like American settlers to go there and build it up and make it wealthy. So they made a deal with a lot of Tennessee settlers and said, you can come to Mexico and start settling in Texas, but there's some rules you have to follow. You have to become Catholic, and you can't have slavery. We don't allow slavery in Mexico. And so these whites, Anglos, English speakers from Tennessee and Kentucky, and all that, said, oh, sure, you know, we'll do that, whatever you say. Thought I'd be cutting the grass today. Looks like it's going to start raining, so that the kibosh are going to be put on that. So they move out there. They start moving to Mexico. What part? The Texas territory of Mexico. Well, naturally, they didn't turn Catholic like they were supposed to. They didn't refuse to bring their slaves. They brought their slaves in and started building plantations and all this. And the Mexicans said, well, you know, you're not really following the rules. And so, well, I'm not going to answer questions about rock music right now, okay? Just talk to me off air about that. A spat broke out, and the Texans accused the Mexicans of not treating them right. And the Mexicans said, that's bull. No one made you come here. And secondly, you never followed any of the rules. So they started fighting. And Mexico, like I said, was very weak and disorganized, and they lost the war. The Texans were able to win independence from Mexico and set up their own country in 1836, the Republic of Texas. They wanted to join the United States, but Martin Van Buren said no, because the President Van Buren said, no, you just tried, you staged this event, and all you were trying to do was add a slave state. He was a Northerner, New Englander. And you're just trying to gain states, slave states in the Senate, because there was just always this battle between the North and the South in the Senate. And if you controlled the Senate, you controlled the government. So just like today. So he said, I don't want Texas as a state. Well, in 1844, you get a new president, James K. Polk, a Democrat, pro-Southern. Okay, we'll add Texas as a state. So right there in 1845, Texas became a state. It's the first and only country to ever become a state. It didn't become a territory first. They signed basically a treaty with the United States saying, we, the people of Texas, will become a state. Interestingly, in the treaty, it said that Texas could leave the United States at any point that they felt like they wanted to leave. So when they seceded in 1861, the Northerners said, that's illegal, you can't secede, which was bull, which was a total lie, because the treaty clearly stated that they could leave. And it also said that Texas could vote to divide themselves up into 5 states on their own without the Congress approving it. They could just voluntarily become 5 states. Of course, Texas would never do that, but they could, technically, theoretically. All right. Oh yeah, you're talking about war pigs. I see what you're saying. As related to war. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good song. All right. Kind of fits with the anti-war message. Yeah, I didn't think about what you were saying. It kind of went over my head. So let's move on to the biggie, right? The biggie, the war between the states, or the war against the South, or whatever you want to call it. What do they call it on TV? The Civil War. Well, you know, not a real civil war, because a civil war generally is 2 factions trying to overthrow one government. Okay. Like the Syrian Civil War, different people trying to overthrow or take control of that country, or the Lebanese Civil War, or the Congo Civil War. Those are true civil wars, because you got 2 groups trying, or 3 groups, whatever, trying to overthrow the government. Well, in 1860, South Carolina left the United States. Oh, I skipped over. What would it? Oh, I skipped over the Mexican War. Excuse me. You got me thrown off with the war pigs thing. Well, the Mexican War is very simple. The Mexicans got angry when the United States allowed Texas to join the USA. And so they started to position troops along the border and say, we're not going to stand for this. But of course, there wasn't anything they could do about it in reality. But President Polk was looking for an opportunity to have an incident occur, which very conveniently occurred along the border. And they made it sound like Pearl Harbor, you know, like Mexico had invaded Wall Street or something. But they got their incident that they were looking for. And so the president went to Congress and said, you know, American blood has been spilled on American soil. And, you know, we got to fight them. Naturally, he just happened to have a huge army down there on the border. If war gets declared, which he knew it would. And that was another controversial one. You had a lot of Northerners up in New England states didn't want the war because they said it's just a plot by the South to add a slave state and then to grab more Mexican territory and add more slave states. They just want, they're just imperialists. They just want to grab land, just like in the 1812. Gabriel said, I sound like a time traveler. I am a time traveler in the theoretic sense right now, metaphysically. So of course, they attacked and they easily beat Mexico. In 2 years, the war was over and the Mexicans got beat. And it was like, it was sort of like outcome never in doubt, you see. Mexico didn't stand much of a chance, and they lost half their country. All of California, the northern part, Alto California, upper, all of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Nevada. They lost it all. One shot. They lost it. Then later on, the U.S. bought some southern land to build a railroad. So they bought that from Mexico. The Gadsden Purchase. That wasn't a war, and they just bought it. So in an anti-war view of the world, we would have opposed it. We would have said, why are we fighting this country? We just want to take their land. It's crazy, you know. I have no issue with Mexicans. I'm not going to go kill Mexicans so I can put a bunch of states out west. That's crazy, you know. So here we got 3 wars already. American Revolution, we would oppose it. The War of 1812, we would oppose it. The War on Mexico, we would oppose it. That's right. That's why California's got all the Spanish names, right? Because it used to be Spain. It used to be Spanish America. That's why we've got all the French names here, because this used to be French America. It was part of France. Louisiana was part of France. Okay. There's a little village in Louisiana called Cocodrie. Means crocodile. Crocodile is the name of the village, Crocodile. Well, they were alligators, but the French thought they were crocodiles at first. So slightly different animal. All right, so now we go to 1860, the war between the states. And I've done other videos about that, so you can get into that by watching those long videos. But see, let's look at that now. So they're arguing about slavery, right? Now we know this. Try to fix this camera a little bit. I thought it was a little off. This was a dispute going back to at least 1787, but really longer than that. What we're going to do about slavery. Now, in 1787, it wasn't that the North said you can't have slavery. There wasn't any talk about that. But they knew that the South had a different viewpoint on the world. You know, they wanted to be agricultural. They were old-fashioned, you know, kind of in a time war. And then the North was more enterprising. They want to be an industrial part of the world. You know, they're more like the British. And they're going to slowly get rid of slavery. Well, the South, they didn't care if the North got rid of slavery. It didn't matter to them. And most of the Northerners didn't care if the South kept slavery for the rest of the world. But they didn't want them to spread it out west. Because, you know, they're in their mind, they're already thinking, we're going to take over the West one day. We're going to grab it from Spain because Spain is weak. That's what Alexander Hamilton and all them are thinking. We're going to grab all that. We're going to have sea to shining sea, right? We're going to have this big American empire, but it's going to be a white person's empire. And that's what they were saying. We want it all white. We don't want all these black people going out west. And you can read the statements from the Free Soil and the anti-slave movement. They said they didn't want to Africanize the West. And the Southerners say, oh, you're so prejudiced. You hate black people so much. We want to bring our servants out with us. Well, you know, of course they wanted slavery out there so they could make people work for them. You know, it's the whole idea. Because they made a lot of money off of cotton and sugarcane, indigo, rice. And that was the way of life in the South. They had slavery. But things got very dicey, right? Because you started having this abolitionist movement, which really disrupted everything, because they say, no, no, you can't have slavery. We're going to help them escape, which violated the Constitution, by the way. And so the South said, oh, no, you're breaking the compact. The agreement in 1787 was, you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. And but now you're trying to interfere with the Southern way of life. So you're practicing violence against us and all of this. So South Carolina said, well, they panicked really. When Lincoln got elected, they panicked because they thought he was going to try to outlaw slavery. It really was not true. Lincoln actually, he said, no, he didn't care if the South kept slavery forever. He actually, they don't tell you this on TV, but Lincoln made a proposal to have a constitutional amendment which would make slavery permanent forever in the South, as long as they wanted it, to guarantee slavery forever. And then his long-term project was actually to send all the black people back to Africa. He wanted an all-white country. So what you see on television about Lincoln is like totally different than the reality. But don't rely on me. Just go read his speeches. Don't listen to me. Listen to Lincoln. But he wanted to keep the United States together because he's got this Republican viewpoint, Alexander Hamilton viewpoint, a big American empire like Great Britain, and we have all this industry and railroads all over the country, and everybody in, you know, in this big industrial country. So the South can't break away because we won't have the big industrial country with all the high tariffs and all the trade and the big factories and everything. But South Carolina, you know, they say, no, 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 we're out of here, you know. Wood Pigeon says, where are you from? From Louisiana, of course. It just came to a head. There was so many problems. We're not going to go into all that. So South Carolina said, look, we're getting out of here. We don't want, we're out. We're just going to repeal the ratification of the Constitution, because South Carolina ratified the Constitution in 1788 or 87. I can't remember. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter. So they simply repealed that. They said, we're just out. And so all the other southern states started to secede as well. We're getting out. And of course, we know Lincoln was saying, no, 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 you can't just leave. So we're gonna like the other wars are just talking about, we're gonna stage an incident. And hopefully we can bait you into attacking first, and then we can stir all the Americans up north to attack the South. Because most Americans up north, their attitude was, you know, to hell with those Southern people. Let them leave if they want. I don't want to die for these people. Let them leave. If they don't like the United States, tell them to get out. It's like a divorce. Tell her get out the house, or tell him get out the house. I don't love him anymore. He doesn't love me. But Lincoln say, no, no, no. We got to have an incident. You know, we got to bait him into attacking. So Kyle says, was all this information that you personally researched, or did you learn it through? I did both, research and education. Kind of like every time they decide to evacuate a native village, they create a fake incident. Yeah, sometimes, but sometimes the Indians were very violent and just attacked white people and killed them. So they gave the Americans the opportunity. In other words, they did things that gave them the opportunity to go attack the Indians. So just curious, because I never learned a lot of this through college. Yeah, you're not going to, probably. But you can learn it. I've got so many books, about it. So they got their incident. Fort Sumter, they got their incident. They baited them into attacking, and they took the bait. Because people in the South, they're very hot-headed. That's a stereotype, but, it's the truth. And Lincoln knew that they were very, Southerners tended to be very hot-headed, and they would take offense to things. And like the thing they hated, they were like, people in the South are like Japanese, they're like white Japanese people. They can take anything but an insult, you know what I mean? So Lincoln knew that. If he could insult them, they were going to fire, he could get that. So he got it. They took the bait and they fired on Fort Sumter. And so Lincoln said, Now we can, you know, and it's the same thing. They fired on our flag. The stars and stripes have been fired on. Oh, and then it got the Northerners say, we've got to defend the Union. So obviously the anti-war position would be, we are against the war, they should let them leave. And you had a lot of anti-war people up north in Indiana, like those states like Indiana. No, we shouldn't be fighting to keep the South in the Union. If they want to divorce, let them leave. We don't kill people to make them be part of a free country. See the problem with that concept? We're going to kill you, right? We're going to kill you to force you to be part of our free country. Now, see the problem with that? It's illogical. So they had the war and the North was more powerful, so they won, barely. South came close to winning. And they didn't have to take over the North to win, right? They didn't want to take over the North. They didn't care about the North. All they had to do was prevent the conquest. See, they would win by default. If they just prevented the Yankees, the invader, from taking them over, then they win. But they failed because they weren't quite strong enough. And they didn't ever get the British and the French to jump in the war like they wanted. The British and the French would have jumped in to help the Americans. But they wanted a good victory just to make sure they weren't putting their money on a bad horse. And they came real close at the Battle of Antietam. If the South had won the Battle of Antietam, Great Britain and France were coming in. There's no doubt about that. You would have had British and French troops landing in America, helping the Confederates. Unfortunately, the South lost the Battle of Antietam, or Manassas, as we call it. I mean, Sharpsburg, excuse me. Manassas was Bull Run, Sharpsburg. So the British and the French didn't come in. They said, nah, let's just watch and see what happens, because we don't want to put our money on a bad horse. And so after that, then they had another chance the next year with Gettysburg, but that failed too. So the British and the French said, well, forget it, you know. So obviously the anti-war position would have been to not attack the South and let them leave if they want to leave. You do not force people at gunpoint to be part of your country. Okay. Love history. My dad is a war buff, but I'm no expert. I love learning all perspectives and angles. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So, okay, so that's the anti-war position there. So now we got all these wars. The Revolution, the War of 1812, the War on the South, 1861. I'm sorry, the Mexican War, the War on the South, the War on Mexico. So every time they look for a pretext, right? A pretext, this so-called reason to fight, when they could have avoided it every time, but you're not going to try to avoid it if you want to fight. Why would you be trying to avoid it? You want the war. So now let's jump ahead to the war on Spain, which is ironic because a lot of Southerners were hot to fight Spain. Now they just finished complaining. Oh, it's raining now. The Southerners, they complained, those Yankees invaded our country. They burned our buildings. They raped our women. They stole all our stuff. Those Yankees, we killed 300,000. We should have killed 300,000 more. Okay, fine. They attacked you. That was terrible. We agree. We don't like invaders, etc. But then when it's time to attack Spain, the Southerners say, yeehaw, let's go fight those Spics, you know. So those Spanish people, they're so bad. You see, so people are very convenient with their anger and their righteousness, right? Aren't they? Now let's look at 1898. This country, Spain, so weak, can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. Now Spain had an empire, one of the oldest, the Philippine Islands, Guam Island out in the Pacific, Puerto Rico Island, which was settled before the United States was ever even explored. That's how old Puerto Rico was and had belonged to Spain. And Cuba. Spain had settled Cuba in the 1490s. For hundreds of years, they had owned Cuba. Cuba was part of Spain like Madrid was part of Spain. San Juan, Puerto Rico was part of Spain like Barcelona was part of Spain. So this is how offended Spain was by this attack. Oh, wait. but they're weak. Spain was weak. They hadn't won a war in 400 years. This was not a strong country. Spain, a victim. They're just out there and they're easy pickings. So the United States said, no, what can we do? Okay. Well, of course, conveniently enough, they had some little rebels in Cuba. Some rebels, you know, they got rebels. Nothing. Junk rebels. Nothing rebels. Can't take over Cuba. Got no power. Can't do nothing. Unless the United States jumps in. Oh, well, of course, we know the story. The United States starts trying to help the rebels. Spain says, why don't you leave us alone and stop helping people trying to overthrow Cuba? We don't want this. Ronald, you tried black coffee yet? No, Mr. Tank. No, Blake. I have tried black coffee in the past. I don't want to talk about black coffee, okay? I want to talk about the topic of the video. Okay, so Spain has no way to defend herself. She got a small navy, a weak army, and no money, basically. So what's going to happen? All you see on the newspaper, in the newspaper during 1898, the evil Spanish, those Spanish people, you know, they're Latino, they're evil. They have all these cartoons in the paper making them look all, you know, look at these ethnic people mistreating these rebels so badly, these poor rebels who want freedom. Yeah, right. And then they put all kind of stuff in the paper about, oh, look, this white woman was in Havana, Cuba. And look, they grabbed her and made her strip down naked, and they searched her for weapons, and they looked all over her naked body. And she was an American white woman. And these Spanish people, you know, these Spanish people are these Spanish men. They love sex so much, you know, they like to rape women. And they put this in the paper, and these Americans say, oh, yeah, we need to fight these people, these animals, you know. And so, you know, they just staged a bunch of incidents. And then the USS Maine battleship just conveniently blows up in Havana Harbor. And then they make it look like Spain did it. And the Spanish say, why would we do that? Why would we blow up an American ship to give you a reason to attack us when we're trying to get out of a war because we don't want you to attack us? And then the Americans intercepted a telegram from the Spanish minister, you know, the Spanish foreign minister, sending a telegram to his representative in Cuba saying, look, you need to watch out for President McKinley because he's real weak. He'll just do whatever the public wants. Like, he won't try to avoid war. I mean, if they want war, he'll have a war. And if he wants peace, if the people want peace, he'll have peace. He's spineless. Like, you got to watch this guy. And so then the newspaper said, look how they insult our president like this. How dare the Spanish insult our president? So, of course, the Congress approves the American invasion of Cuba to free Cuba from Spain. And then, since they were getting ready to attack anyway, the American Pacific Navy just happened to be right there next to the Philippines. Theodore Roosevelt made sure that happened, this Republican imperialist from New York City, by the way, Manhattan, New York City, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. So it was all set up. They declared war on Spain. Well, they didn't actually declare war on Spain. What did they do? They said, we authorized the president to send military forces into Spain, into Cuba as he sees fit. Well, that is a declaration of war because you're saying the president, you know, the president was going to do it. So Spain declared war on the United States. And we know the result. They attacked Spanish Cuba and easily beat the Spanish. And they attacked Puerto Rico and easily defeated Puerto Rico. And they attacked the Spanish in the Philippines and easily defeated the Spanish, who fought very bravely. They destroyed the Spanish Navy outside of Cuba, Santiago, Cuba. So it's sort of like a mugging, like you get mugged, like somebody's walking down the street minding their business and you say, hey, babe, what you got? And they say, look, I don't want to be bothered. I want to keep what I got. Oh, you're going to give it to me, boo. And the person says, no, I don't want to give you nothing. And you attack them and beat them up and take their stuff and say, now, see what happens when you violate freedom? That's the truth of the Spanish-American War, not the real name. The real name is the War on Spain. Now, that doesn't sound nice, does it? But that's the truth. So you know what the anti-war position is. We don't attack other countries that's minding their own business. That's the anti-war position, okay? Now, if you don't like it, tough. That's the position we take. I'm talking about the anti-war people. You can be hoorah and say, let's go fight these people. These people are not going to attack the United States. Now let's go on. We don't have but a few more minutes, so we're going to have to make a second session. This is session 1. It's part 4 of the government history, politics, etc. But we're going to have to make another session. We got World War I to talk about, the First World War, which is really the World War Part 1, if you want to be honest. And then we got the World War Part 2, if you want to be honest. And the World War Part 3, and that's what we're part of today, 2018. We're in the World War Part 3, the Cold War. We're still in the Cold War. Don't fool yourself. Don't live in a dream world. Let's live in the real world, the modern. So in the second session, I think that's a good way to do it. The first session was like the old wars up until the 20th century, okay? Now we go into the modern wars, which are way worse. The other ones were terrible. This is worse, because now we got the ability with modern technology to kill way more people in a shorter amount of time. So now we're going to go into the World War Part 1, so-called World War I, 1914, 1918. Then we'll talk about the World War Part 2, or so-called World War II, 1939 to 1945. And then we'll talk about the Cold War, 1944 to the present, World War Part 3, which involves sub-wars. In other words, wars within the war. Because the Cold War is the United States versus Russia. That's what that is. And it's really the British versus Russia since 1815. And I talked about that in another video. It's really been going on since 1815, people. It's been going on for 203 years. Okay, but let's get past that a little bit. But I can demonstrate that, actually. But so we're going to talk about in session 2 in March, because I do this about once a month. We don't want to do it too much. People will say, oh, I get sick of this. I want to do beer reviews. I don't want to hear about important things. I want to hear about trivial things like beer. I understand that, you know, beer, you can kind of detach yourself from the world, and you can drink beer and say, I think this is good, and I think this is bad. And then people can say, oh, you're stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. And other people can say, I loved your video. You know, all right. But it's really not important. You understand? Some people think beer reviews are important. Like, they think that's important. They get mad at me over beer. I'm not going to be your friend. I'm unfriending you because of beer. Well, okay, you think that's important. All right. No, wars against other countries, and that's what's important. And trying to have peace in the world and helping the poor and all. This is what's important. Okay, but, you know, oh, that rain. I don't know what dream I was living in that I was going to cut the grass, but it's getting heavier and heavier. It's warm, though. The spring is here in Louisiana. The spring is here. Believe me, everything's starting to bud. The grass is growing. Winter is dying away, dying away. Just like I've told everybody. But it was a terrible winter. Terrible, 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 terrible. 18 degrees, pipes, busted pipes. Oh, terrible, horrible. Now, so in session 2 in March, let's say March, we'll talk about World War I, or if you want to be more accurate, the war against Germany. Because I'll tell you a little secret in case you didn't know. Germany never wanted to fight the United States, nor did Germany ever have plans to attack the United States, just in case you were confused by that. You say, but what about World War II in 1940? Yeah, Germany really wasn't trying to fight the United States and had no plans to attack the United States. Same old thing. Korean War, we'll talk about that. The Vietnam War, we'll talk about that. The war, and then all these other things, attacking Iraq twice. Attacking Serbia twice. And then we had the Hillary Clinton Obama wars, attacking Libya, attacking Egypt, attacking Syria. Yeah. That's right. If she had gotten elected in 2016, we might have had World War with Russia already. Who knows? She was so antagonistic toward Russia. It was like she wanted to start a world war. She was a crazy person on, remember that movie, The Dead Zone? Like that senator that wanted to have a world war just because, just to do it, you know, that kind of attitude. Now, what about Trump? Well, attacking Syria, I don't support that. Bombing Syria last year. But that was more like a show, I think, than a reality. Just like bomb an empty airfield to say, look, I got these people on my back. I'm trying to make friends with Russia, but these people, they're so entrenched. You know, they want a confrontation. So let me just bomb this and make it look like it's something, you see. So that could be, that could have been more like a play acting thing. But all right, so, oh, that rain is really getting heavy. You can hear it probably over the video. Good grief. So we talked about the wars up until 1914. So in the next video in a month, okay, let's talk about the modern wars of the last 104 years. We can do that in an hour, I think. So let me know what you think about it. Donald Trump said many times during the election, I'm the most militaristic person. I never heard that once. No. He said he wanted to rebuild the U.S. military and all of that, which, you know, if you had an anti-imperialistic and anti-war policy as a president, you wouldn't really need a big military because you wouldn't be out there looking for trouble, you know. So we're going to see. We're not passing judgment on Donald Trump right now, either pro nor con, because he's only been president for a year. So we don't want to jump the gun on that. Let's give that time. Let's see what happens. And anyway, I'm a Democrat, so I should be out here hating Donald Trump, right? Talking bad about him. I hate Donald Trump. I shouldn't I be saying that as a registered Democrat, that I hate him and I love Hillary Clinton? Well, sorry, you're not hearing that from me. Nope, I don't vote that way. I vote the way I think I should vote, not just whatever, if the person has a D or an R behind their name. Okay, so I don't know how Donald Trump's gonna turn out. So far, it's kind of, you know, we're gonna see. We hoping he's anti-war. We don't know. It's only been a year. The signs are mixed. The signals are mixed. As we know, or we should know. Okay, so I'd be curious about your feedback. If it's intelligent commentary, meaning you might say, I don't agree with you, and here's the reasons why. That's intelligent conversation. Not screw you, I hope you die, and, you know, F you, blah, blah, blah. Like some people, that's their idea of talking. And then they'll say, you deleted my comments. No, because you're not talking like a regular human being. You know what I mean? Or they'll use straw man arguments. Like we're talking about the Spanish-American War, right? And they'll say, well, you know, during the Crusades in 1099, such and such happened. Well, we're not talking about the Crusades. Okay? And they'll say, well, I don't think Jesus was, we're not talking about the Bible and what Jesus said. We're talking about the Spanish-American War. That's a straw man argument. And they do that on Facebook all the time. And then all the people, they're not talking about the post I made about the war. You get this big argument going about Jesus being correct or not. And that was the whole reason for that. It was to misdirect from the argument at hand and bring it over here and spend 8 hours on Facebook arguing about Christianity is fake or Christianity is the truth. And a lot of the people will do those straw man arguments. It was never to talk about the war or the post I made. It was to redirect. And I told the people that do that, I said, look, I'm warning you, if you make straw man arguments, you're getting deleted because you're not even addressing the topic at hand. And you know what you're doing. Either talk about the topic or don't talk. Now that's a fair thing to do. Because somebody accused, said, you delete comments that people that don't agree with you. I said, that's not true. That's a lie. I deleted comments that were disrespectful, and you know what I'm talking about. The troll, the modern internet comments. They're like, go kill yourself, idiot. That's not an argument, so don't make the comment. Go do that on somebody else. Or the straw man arguments, which is always about redirecting the argument and not even addressing the topic at hand. But at no point ever have I deleted comments that just simply disagree with me. That is not true. I don't do that. Okay, thank you for watching this video production. I'd be curious to see what you think about the anti-war viewpoint through the years.